Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Eno Center webinar. I hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy. My name is Paul Lewis, and I will be moderating the webinar today on the state of the freight rail industry in 2020. This came to our attention in part because we've heard a lot about consumer-facing industries like aviation or public transit, retail, but less publicized, but still as important, is how our freight transportation system is operating during the pandemic and dealing with some of the disruptions that we've seen. The freight rail industry is one of the core components of that, of course, and it continues to operate throughout the pandemic, but faces some significant operational and financial challenges due to fluctuating demand, particularly for some key traffic drivers like automobiles and energy. And while COVID has upset the industry status quo, operations do continue, and the industry is adapting to keeping traffic moving, meeting customers' needs. It's the reason why we are still able to get food in the grocery stores and access things and different goods that are helping us adjust our own personal lives. So in this webinar, we've invited Ian Jefferies, who's the president and CEO of the Association of American Railroads, to outline the state of the freight rail industry during this crisis, kind of give us some indication on where the industry is headed and what the public policies are looking like to help aid in this recovery and ensure that the freight system broadly is continuing to move forward. So Ian is, like we said, is the president and CEO of the Association of American Railroads, where he advocates for and works with member railroads to ensure the long-term viability of the railroad industry. He has more than a decade of experience working in government. He was, from 2009 to 2013, a senior policy advisor to the chairman of the U.S. Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. And from 2013 to 2019, he served as AAR Senior Vice President of Government Affairs. So we'll hear from Ian in a minute, but just a quick note on format. This webinar is scheduled for 30 minutes, and we're gonna follow a fireside chat format where I'm gonna plan to ask Ian some questions about rail traffic, about public policy for freight, and some of the new policy initiatives that are coming up. And he has a few slides that are going to illustrate some of his points and some of the trends that we've seen. I'm then going to take questions from the participants on the line for the last 15 minutes or so. If you have a question at any time during this webinar, please submit it via the questions function on the GoToWebinar control panel. I'm going to take those questions and ask them directly to Ian on the latter half of this webinar. And for those asking, the slides and a recording of this webinar will be available on Eno's website in just a few hours. So stay tuned for that. You'll get an email from us once the webinar is concluded with links on how to get those. So with that, we'll start, and I'm gonna just kind of pitch it over to Ian now to kind of give us a sense for how COVID-19 has affected the freight rail network. What are some of the big trends that you're seeing, and can you give us a sense for what's the state of freight rail?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Certainly a great topic to be talking about. So, you know, I think freight rail, like every other industry in America, was hit pretty substantially and continues to be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And if we can pull up slide 2, it will just give you a good overview of really the year-over-year comparison to what we've seen in rail traffic thus far this year. So, you know, we started out 2020 a little off of where we were the last couple of years, but really you hit March and you see that dramatic drop-off. Now, I say dramatic, it was certainly a dramatic drop-off, but our industry, you know, at its what we believe and hope to be the trough of the impact, was really off between 20-25% overall. So certainly we we didn't see the hit that certain consumer-facing industries, the airlines, for example, who were looking at 90% reductions, but still substantial nonetheless. And that decrease really crossed all of the different commodity sectors that we serve, whether it's energy products, consumer goods, chemicals, automobiles specifically, which we'll get into, but really, hit across the board. But what we've seen now is, after what I said, I hope is the trough, and I know my members hope is the trough, is that we have seen a gradual tick back, and you see the line, the trend line has started to come up toward a more positive outlook. And really, again, that is due to a couple different factors. Certain commodity groups are returning fairly strongly. We're doing a lot of consumer goods, consumer products that end up on store shelves or through e-commerce end up getting delivered to your house. UPS is the largest customer for the industry writ large. So certainly e-commerce has thrived during the pandemic, as we're all receiving. I know in my house, it seems like we're receiving a handful of packages every day, and a lot of those end up on the rails at some point. And so if you flip forward to the next slide, it really shows that uptick we've seen in the intermodal. So that's container traffic, that's port to truck, to rail to truck. It's highly truck competitive traffic, premium traffic that needs to move. And you see after that trough, we've seen a pretty dramatic increase into last week, which I think was our second best week on intermodal this year thus far, following a week in February. So last week, if I'm looking at data, we were 1.8% off where we were this time last year. And that certainly is we want to be doing better than that, of course, but we're getting back to that equilibrium year over year. So we'll hope that trend continues, certainly going into the fall peak season as we approach the holidays.
Great, that's really interesting. Can you go into maybe some of the specific types of commodities? I mean, you mentioned automobiles as one that was particularly hard hit. Are there any that were, like automobiles, hit specifically hard, or some maybe that didn't see any kind of effects? Were there some that held up pretty well and were pretty resilient, especially during that trough that you're talking about, in terms of specific types of traffic?
Right. So let's start with that automotive example. So if you'll flip it to the next slide here. A lot of people don't really realize that, I think 75% of finished autos and probably an equal part of auto components and parts move on rail at some point in their lives. And as we all know, during the onset of the pandemic, pretty much every, if not all, auto plant in the country shut down. And so you see that, indicated in the traffic here. We're moving along. The numbers were pretty good year over year comparatively, but we went off a cliff, quite frankly. And that was a steep drop and one that wasn't surprising, and certainly impacted not only domestic traffic but cross-border traffic, which I know we're going to chat about here in a few minutes. But as plants started to reopen earlier in the year, you see that trend line start to reverse pretty dramatically. And so while we saw a significant drop off in recent weeks, we've seen that number rising quickly. And as time goes on, certainly I expect things to continue to improve there and get us back competitive with the last few years. Another commodity that was hit pretty dramatically, coal. Coal's been off for a variety of reasons over recent years due to just structural changes in the energy sources this country is using. Environmental policies impacting. Obviously, the extremely low price of natural gas has caused a dramatic shift over to gas for a power source. But also contributing to that decline was all the manufacturing industrial output that slowed down across this country. So that's certainly a source of fuel that coal is driving. Also, coal is leads to various uses of different components. So coal is still off. It's still off pretty dramatically where it was, but I would say its numbers are improved as well as our economy has started to get up and running a bit more. Ag has continued to, it had its ups and downs, but I would say ag is moving pretty well overall. With the phase one agreement with China that provided the opportunity for some decent ag exports, and some of that is still continuing. So it's really a mixed bag across the board. I mentioned intermodal. Intermodal has come back pretty strong. Took a quick hit, but it's come back strong. So I think by and large we're cautiously optimistic about where things are going.
Great. So, and within this, I mean, these numbers are very much kind of broad numbers for the whole country. Have you seen any discrepancies for different parts of the country? Is the Northeast hit harder or worse than the Southwest? And when talking about that too, how is international traffic, not only from Canada and Mexico, but also from our ports? How has that all been changed, and how does it look when we look at different parts of the country?
Right. So from where I sit, we really do take a U.S. and then a North American look at things. So certainly there are differences in the different regions of the country depending on what the thriving commodities are. Autos play a major role in certain parts of the country, so they would have been impacted stronger than other parts. Ag plays a major role in other parts, chemicals in other parts, intermodal traffic on the coasts and on the borders. But I'm trying to forgive me. Yeah, if we go to the next slide here, really if we look at the West Coast ports, the U.S. West Coast ports, you see the TEUs, so the containers coming in through the ports, and then you see the originated containers that railroads are taking out of the ports. And yes, we saw a decline with when Wuhan, when that part of China, which is very significant in industrial manufacturing, a lot of goods produced there come across the ocean into the U.S. So when that industrial output was shut down, it really negatively impacted the volume of goods coming through the West Coast ports. But I think it's interesting if you look at this chart and take a walk back, to 2018, you really see that decline in TEUs coming into the ports well before the pandemic, and that's a direct result of some of the trade challenges we've had with China. And so it's really, yes, COVID certainly had an effect, and I would say it exacerbated an already downward trend we had seen. And you see at the end there, we've started to tick back up, and certainly increased trade activity will drive that number higher. I think it's interesting if you're talking about the northern and southern borders. If you compare May of 2019 to May of 2020, traffic on the southern border was almost 70% off. Now think about how we talked about the autos earlier. A lot of that traffic is automobile related. Rails are moving either auto parts or finished autos back and forth across the borders all day, every day. So when the auto industry shuts down, it has a pretty dramatic impact on that southern border traffic. On the northern border, it was pretty substantial as well, upwards of 60% year over year in May. But again, those numbers are starting to climb back in the right direction. So certainly international traffic has been impacted.
Got it. And is there are you seeing a difference between these trends as they affect the large Class 1 railroads versus some of the short lines and Class 2 and 3 railroads? How has that been affected?
Right. So, I think we have well over 500 smaller railroads in the country. We have the 7 Class 1s, but smaller railroads are numbered in the hundreds. And for the most part, they're an extension of the realities that the Class 1 railroads are experiencing. So, the smaller railroads, the Class 2s, Class 3s, have certainly seen, I think, similar impacts. Some more than others, some less than others, fortunately. But really, I think by and large, it's a reflection of what we're seeing, not only with the larger railroads, but with the economy writ large.
We've talked a lot about the volumes of freight on the railroads. What does this mean for their finances? Can you talk a little bit about the bottom line over the last couple of months?
Certainly, I make a point not to discuss individual railroad finances, but I can tell you that, our industry, as I mentioned, we've certainly taken a dramatic hit when it comes to traffic. And one of the things I'm most proud of this industry, though, is that it is very well capitalized. Anyone who's heard me talk before, I always talk about the private investment that goes back into our industry, about $25 billion every year of private investment back into our network. And doing that year over year has really led to a network that's in the best shape it's ever been. And so you pair that really strong physical infrastructure with companies who I think have been very smart on the financial side and are well capitalized. We were well positioned to ride out this downturn, and have certainly been resilient in working with our customers, adjusting operations, adjusting the types of products we're able to offer. But one of the things I'm most proud of is, unlike a lot of other industries, we have not had to go to the federal government seeking direct funding or seeking financial support. And again, that's due to that sustained investment. That's due to that well-capitalized nature that allows us to continue to operate in good times and bad, and continue to serve our customers in whatever capacity they need. So, we're riding this out like everyone else is, and doing it, I think, from a position of relative strength.
That's great. One of the members of the Association of American Railroads is, of course, Amtrak, and Amtrak spends a lot of its time riding on freight rail tracks. Can you give us a little bit of the sense of the dynamic that AAR is working with Amtrak? Their financial picture is a little bit different because they are much more consumer facing. How is Amtrak doing, and what can we expect in terms of its relationship with the freight railroads?
Yeah, absolutely. And Amtrak has certainly seen a dramatic impact, akin to what our nation's airlines have seen. I think at the trough, Amtrak was facing a 90% plus decrease in ridership, which presented very, very challenging situations at a time when their new CEO, Bill Flynn, was coming in to take the reins. And so I would say that the team over there has done a pretty darn good job adjusting to meet the new reality they've been dealing with. And anyone who may have seen the interview with Mr. Flynn in the Washington Post the other day, he made a lot of comments about how they're adjusting their business, how they're adjusting the products they're offering their customers to be able to ride out this really challenging situation our country is facing. And whether that's right sizing the number of trips a day in a certain area, that is I think obviously increased sanitization, increase practices to ensure social distancing on the train, to reduce risk, to provide as safe an experience as possible. But it's, without a doubt, it's been an immensely challenging time for Amtrak, as it has been for other consumer-facing travel industries. But they continue to work through it, and I'm confident they'll come out of it the other side of this. Certainly, I'd say a leaner, more nimble service provider. So it's they're working through it, and they'll come out of it well.
Got it. Thanks for that. And before we turn to questions from participants, I've got one more question for you. And it's about public policy, which is what ENO does, and obviously what you do in Washington. Can you talk about how your policy agenda has changed in the past few months? What is the new outlook for public policy and freight railroads look like in the coming months and years as we adjust to a new normal?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say largely our public policy views have remained constant, but I think have taken on a renewed level of urgency, perhaps. We are an economically regulated industry, and our mantra, for a very long time is it's an absolute necessity that we have the ability to earn the revenues necessary to reinvest back into our networks, to serve our customers, and to grow into the future, maintain competitiveness. And that's due to a smart regulatory framework around economic regulation. So, because of that framework, that is why we've been able to invest so much over the years. That is why we were in a position that we could be resilient and ride this out, and certainly should be a model for the future. Because again, we're talking about surface transportation reauthorization these days, and seems like every week is infrastructure week on Capitol Hill. But freight railroads are in a position where we aren't seeking, we aren't living from extension to extension. We're able to invest our own capital back into our network. We always say we invest so taxpayers don't have to. And really, that model is, I think, served the industry and our customers in America well. So an economically sound regulatory framework is key, and that's front and center for us. And we'll continue to work to make sure that that framework continues, that allows us to operate in a market-based reality. I think the other main policy outlook or policy objective would be, and this has bared fruit certainly over the past 3 and 4 months, is allowing us to continue to develop new technologies, deploy new technologies on the safety and operational front, and having an operational regulatory structure that allows us to deploy those and evolves with technology. For example, we have numerous new types of detectors, monitors, other technology apparatus that we're using on our tracks, on our trains, that are listening and watching for defects as they may develop, or identifying risks really before they become critical. And that will lead to a smarter rail system, and a rail system that will continue to evolve more safely, continue to maintain its competitiveness with its competitors, and continue to allow us to move more goods by rail. And in a very small way, we were able to leverage some of these things during the pandemic by working with the FRA, who allowed us to change up some of the ways we were doing things to make sure that our employees who are on the job site every day, our folks can't work from home, the vast majority of them, and but allowed us to put into place a work scenario that employees are able to social distance on the job, are able to do certain things using technology and using new ways of operating. And the DOT was good enough to provide waivers to allow us to do things in a new way, and that's what we need from a regulator, a forward-looking point of view that embraces technology and change, because the outcomes from doing so are going to result in an even safer railroad, a more efficient railroad, and a more competitive railroad.
Got it. That's great. Thank you for that. So like I said, we're going to get to some questions here, and we've got over 400 people on the phone, which is fantastic. And,
yeah,
and
great.
A few dozen questions that are coming in. For those that want, please type your questions into the question function. I'm going to try to summarize and get to as many as possible. In your last comment, you talked about investments. Has COVID-19 affected the planned infrastructure improvements and other investments from the railroad? And are we seeing some delays in some of the planned improvements to the rail infrastructure? Or are they still continuing to invest at the same levels they were prior to the crisis?
Right. So railroads have a certain level of what I would call core investment, core maintenance that has to occur every year, regardless of it good times or bad. And that's track replacement, that's ballast, that's making sure the network as it currently stands is as in strong a shape as it possibly can be. And railroads have plowed ahead with that. And in some cases, especially during earlier in the year when we had such volume reductions, I think we're able to take advantage of some of those lulls in business to do some replacement and do some maintenance to really get ahead of schedule. So it's kind of the inverse of what you might think. Now, maybe where you saw a bit of an impact is equipment purchases, CapEx purchases. We've got a lot of cars in storage, locomotives in storage right now with the downturn. So you're not seeing those types of purchases, but the network, the physical infrastructure itself, I think has received, at least the same level of investment it would in other years. And in certain cases, certainly, like I said, we were able to speed up some things to take advantage of a lull in traffic in a time where we didn't expect to have that.
Got it. A bunch of questions coming in about mode share, and it's the relationship between the railroads with trucking and also some relationship with maritime. And over the past couple of decades, we've seen a decline in mode share relative to truck on railroads. Can you talk a little bit about how the current crisis is affecting the mode share and what some of the plans are to in terms of mode share from the rail industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we always say truckers are our biggest competitors and our biggest customers. So, it's always a unique relationship. But, I guess, first of all, I'd talk about the infrastructure side of things. The Highway Trust Fund, of course, well documented financial challenges for years now. And our mantra has been that, the users need to cover the cost of the Highway Trust Fund. Of the infrastructure they operate over, and that includes our friends in the trucking industry. And when you look at what is it, $140 billion in general fund transfers from 2008 to 2020, to us that's a direct subsidy. That's we're paying for our infrastructure. We believe that our competitors should as well. And certainly to their credit, some of the larger trucking interests that have offered up ideas for how to increase what they're paying in. So I certainly credit them with coming up with ideas and possible solutions. And really, when we look at the competitive side, then so infrastructure is a part of it. But when we look at the competitive side, intermodal is now our biggest traffic segment running on the rail. So that is that truck to train to truck or straight up truck competitive traffic. And I think this year has certainly provided some opportunities as far as pulling that traffic. A lot of that traffic moves back and forth based on the economic conditions of the trucking industry versus the rail industry. I think our members have done a lot to really drive the products they're offering to really meet that competitive line with a lot of what trucks can offer. Changing operating practices to really shrink that mileage differential that makes train truck competitive. It certainly used to be the mantra of anything below 500 trucks had a dramatic advantage. I think that number is decreasing, and it's decreasing daily because of the operational efficiencies our members are putting into their system. So, and the products they're able to offer. And certainly that's something we will continue to strive for because we need a healthy truck rail competitive environment. So we'll continue to make gains on that front.
Got it. Looks like on the phone we have a few folks that are pretty knowledgeable and wonky. There's a bunch of questions about scheduled railroading.
Yeah.
And for those curious, this is a kind of a new operational model that a lot of the larger railroads are employing and were employing prior to COVID. Can you talk a little bit about how the transition to PSR is going under COVID, and what kind of disruptions and new operational models are coming up with given the dramatic changes in commodity flows?
Certainly. So I guess regarding the term PSR, if you look at some of the tenets of that term, and I think that term probably means something different to everybody you ask, but some of the core tenets are, increasing, maximizing asset utilization, increasing efficiency, providing a more just-in-time product to your customers. And so whether it's railroading or any industry out there, I think those are all goals that a competitive company is striving towards. But I would say that the operating systems that our railroads have in place, whether you call it PSR or whatever it is, have really allowed them to thrive during this time because they have developed. I keep using the term resilient, but that is the term to use. Really resilient systems that allow them to flex up and down to meet customer needs. And certainly, based on conversations with the STB, other shipper groups, shippers are seeing and reporting some of the best service they've ever had. Now, of course, you could say, oh, well, that's due because there's less traffic out there. Certainly that has an impact, but customer needs also changed quite a bit over the past 4 months. So railroads had to adjust the products they were offering, adjust the service they were providing in order to meet those changes. And on the backside of this, we're working with our customers, all the railroads are, to make sure our customers have what they need when we come out of this and as we come out of it. So, I think rails, thrived pretty well here, and quite frankly, may have been better positioned now than we would have been years back, and are probably better positioned for this increase in traffic because of the adjustments they've been able to make, not only throughout the pandemic, but going into it as well.
And to follow up on that, a question I got related to some of the public policy components. in order to allow for some of those adjustments, have the railroads received any kind of waivers or any kind of exemptions from specific regulations to help them cope with some of the challenges related to the COVID disruptions?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we did receive a number of waivers, applied and received several waivers from the FRA. And the waivers that we have exercised exclusively have been to ensure social distancing in the workplace, to ensure our employees can work in as safe a manner as possible. So absolutely, we've taken advantage of those, but I can tell you 100% they've been used for ensuring that employees have as safe a space as possible to work.
Got it. And we're right at the half an hour, so I'm going to ask another question or two. And one that you just talked about is the workforce. That came up a couple times in the questions. Can you talk a little bit about like two components? One, what are the railroads doing to ensure safety in the workforce? You just touched on that a little bit. And two, what is the employment outlook? Given the disruptions, what's the job market look like for the freight rail industry, especially given now that the job market is very much in flux?
Yeah. So two good questions. One, what did we do to make sure our employees are safe? So a couple of different things. One, I mentioned the vast majority of our employees, they don't have the option to work from home. Railroads in 24/7 business, out in the field, out on the network, out on the rail. We need to continue to be able to operate to serve our customers, to serve communities. So it was important that we stood up procedures quickly to make sure our employees could operate in as low a risk area as possible. And so that includes, obvious things like PPE pervasive throughout the network, increased sanitization and cleaning between shifts, making sure that everything is cleaned as well as possible. Railroading is an outdoor sport, so it's still important to make sure inside the cabs of locomotives clean between every shift. Like I mentioned, working with our regulator to ensure that operating practices allowed for social distancing. And really, credit goes to our employees. We have an employee base that is used to strict adherence to strong safety protocols, regardless of what's going on. Safety is always going to be number one with our folks. And so they can adjust well and have adjusted really well to operate in as safe a manner as possible. And I would say the numbers of affected employees has been encouraging. You always want zero, but our numbers are, on a percentage basis, dramatically lower than what the broader country is seeing. And the second question about job outlook. Certainly, there have been furloughs as traffic dropped off as much as it did. I mentioned earlier that we didn't seek direct funding in the CARES Act and certainly aren't in the latest stimulus effort. But one thing we did do in working with our labor partners was to ensure that any rail employees who were affected were eligible for enhanced unemployment benefits. Railroading operates under a different unemployment program, different retirement program. So, it always requires special legislative language to be added. We're very happy that Congress included that language. So our folks who have been impacted were eligible and continue to be eligible for the enhanced unemployment benefits. As traffic has started to come back a bit, obviously, we're looking to bring as many of those folks back as possible. And we're always going to be a reflection of how the economy is. So if the economy is roaring, then we're hiring and we're bringing people on board and providing good paying jobs. And if we're in a less robust state, then that obviously impacts our job numbers as well. But I know all of our members are looking forward to being able to bring back as many as they can with traffic continuing to increase.
Got it. We're a few minutes over, and so I'm gonna, unfortunately, we're not gonna be able to get all the questions. And so I know a few of you on the phone, we will be following up with you and hopefully providing some answers to your questions. But Ian, before we close, is there anything else that you'd like to mention on the webinar today, and anything else you want to close with before we say goodbye?
Well, first of all, just thanks everybody for taking part. I'm really impressed that so many people were interested. I think let's do it again, continue the conversation, but appreciate the opportunity. And, I'm sure you can tell that I feel like we have a really good story to tell as an industry. I'm enthusiastic about telling it. I tell it a lot. But, railroading has been around for a long time, and we've been through a lot, and we'll get through this strong and continue to keep serving for America. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Ian, and thanks everyone for joining. Again, please continue to check Eno's website for lots of different webinars and content in the coming weeks. Again, we will email out the slides and a recording of this webinar in just a few hours, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, thank you, Paul. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ian.